let's hit a topic that has been beaten to death, but this time we're going to hit the BimmerWorld perspective on it a little bit, which I am fully prepared and ready for you guys to leave some comments saying, you should do it this way, that's wrong, you should do it that way. Everyone has an opinion on this. Here is mine / BimmerWorld's. So, S55 crank hubs, which actually doesn't apply only to S55s. The crank hub issue really is a little bit inherent in multiple BMW generations over the past few years. Before we go through the couple of options of S55 crank hub solutions, let's start with defining the problem with this stock one. The stock hub, main hub here, 3 pieces. You get the hub, the timing chain sprocket, and the oil pump sprocket. And what happens is you got your big crank bolt on the front, bolts into the crank, squeezes this thing together. There's friction washers between here, and the whole thing, I mean, this bolt is torqued to the moon, but this whole thing is just held together by friction. And what happens in big power applications, this sprocket can spin relative to the other ones, thus losing time, which means you will end up having codes for timing issues. Your engine is no longer going to be in time the way it's supposed to be, so can cause some catastrophic issues too, but fortunately it seems like a lot of people get away with it with just a code to start with and goes into limp mode. We've had this issue not just on S55s. We actually had this issue back in the day when we were running the F30s in IMSA, when we would go to tracks like Sebring, and you got these big jarring bumps that just abuse the system. These vibrations have to transfer somewhere through the car, and those vibrations would sometimes just jiggle this thing, cause this thing to spin. So really, BMW has used this type of timing chain securing system for a number of years, N54s, N55, N20s, S55s. The newer S58 cars and some of those have a different system. It's built into the crank, don't have this sort of concern any longer. Some other things that cause this thing to spin, misfires. If your engine's misfired and you're really pounding on it, those misfires are each going to be a jolt to the system because you got a explosion that isn't timed right, that's just hammering on that piston and can just doop, 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 doop. It seems like one of the myths that may have some validity is that DCT cars are more prone to this, and the typical reason for that is when you downshift in a manual car, you typically have a smooth downshift, then you get on the gas, versus a DCT, if you hit that kick down, and the torque in these things is just so high, so immediate, especially at a low RPM, you hit that kick down and it just, boom, just a torque jolt straight to this thing, potentially causing it to spin. A couple of different options we have here for solutions, which is first the Vargas spline lock, then we've got the SSR 4-pin hub. The Vargas spline lock, some people feel like is not a full solution, and maybe it's not a full 100% solution, but really, I feel like it gets the job done for most. This spline ends up, these teeth end up pressing into the crank and keeping it secure as an extra measure. And the timing chain sprocket is built into the hub itself, making this a 2-piece system versus the factory, which is a 3-piece system. This system still uses the factory oil pump sprocket, which has these friction washers on it, which once everything's tightened down, those friction washers stay secured against the crank and the hub. This oil pump sprocket does not see the same amount of load and force as the timing chain sprocket, so some people feel like this is still a risk. Okay, maybe it is. However, the load that this sees is nowhere near the load that the timing chain sees. The big benefit of this, while maybe it's not the most complete invasive solution to really dig into the crank with the pin solution, is the install process. I've done one of these without pulling the pan before, which for the other options, you got to pull the pan, drill the crank, which makes this a little bit appealing for a DIY person or just a shop trying to turn some stuff around quick for a car that's not going to make GT more level of power or more. So for a lot of applications, like this F80 that is sticking on stock turbos, still has cats, still going to be a reasonable car, going to make some more power with it here soon, this is a good solution to throw into that. One other thing with this is you can get this package, the Vargas package, without the oil pump sprocket, but if your hub has spun, do replace this. You can maybe get away with not replacing it if you haven't spun the hub, but really, if you're this far into this project, go ahead and replace this thing. The ultimate solution, I would say, is the SSR 4-pin hub, also a 2-piece design. This system uses a keyway system. So the Vargas one has the friction washers on the oil pump sprocket. This oil pump sprocket has keyways that go into the main hub, and then these 4 pins that go into the crank. Now, this system is pretty invasive because you got to get to a lot of things to be able to drill the crank. You have to drill these 4 pins into the crank. Now, it's not like you're just freehanding where you're going to drill these things. This package does come with a template that you bolt onto the crank so that you can make sure you drill in precisely the correct location. This is the option we went with on the GT More just because we were throwing so much power and so much abuse at it. So for those that are really looking for the end-all be-all, and it's a little bit more work and labor involved, this is really where I land. However, like I said, the Vargas solution does work for a lot of applications. Also, forgot this was here. This is the Vargas crank hub capture plate. So I mentioned earlier, this bolt sees a ton of torque. To clamp this thing down, I forget what it is. It's some high torque rating and then 270 degrees of rotation or something like that. I'm probably saying that wrong. Anyways, it's 300, 400 foot-pounds of torque in the end that is holding this thing together. And I'd be lying if I didn't think that a lot of people didn't get the appropriate amount of torque on this bolt when installing it into their crank. This piece goes over the bolt, and then this bolts into the harmonic balancer on the front and helps keep that bolt secure, keep it from backing out as an extra safety measure. I do not find that this to be a safety measure or a fix for the crank hub issue, but is a good safety measure for just making sure that the bolt doesn't back out. So I do like throwing this on when I am doing one of these packages just to make sure that this bolt, which is key to the success of all the timing components of the engine, stays put. There it is. Tell me why you think I'm wrong. Tell me why you think I'm right. Check out these things at BimmerWorld.com.
Ready to kill? Should be an awesome race weekend. We are ready to kill it this year. It's good. It's going to be a wild ride.